So what does a retired police officer, Christian man, a pastor, have to say to NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick about sitting out the national anthem? Does Colin Kaepernick have the right to do that? Sure. Free country. Absolutely. That's one of the things that soldiers have died for on the field. And when police protect him, maybe going in and out of a game, whatever happens in that context, when that's the situation, they are protecting him, so he has the freedom to do what he wants to do, even in this regard. But what does a retired policeman have to say to Colin Kaepernick? And there's an open letter by Chris Amos posted on Facebook that went viral, much to Pastor Amos's surprise. He's pastor of Christ Fellowship Church in Chesapeake, Virginia. Brand new non-denominational church plant that's committed to becoming one in Christ by keeping Christ first. And he is a former policeman. And as he says in his open letter, I'm a retired police officer that had the misfortune of having to shoot and kill a 19-year-old African-American male. So, Chris, welcome to the Line of Fire. Thanks so much for taking time to join us today.
Thank you, sir. It's a privilege to be here.
Now, Chris, when you wrote your open letter, what were you thinking? Well, it's eloquent. It's powerful. You could write it. I could never write it in 1,000 lifetimes because I haven't lived what you lived. What were you expecting to happen?
You know, not anything like what did happen. Facebook is one of those things where if it's not a video or a little meme picture, it pretty much gets ignored. So when I posted it, I couldn't fathom people actually taking time to read it. I heard about Colin's remarks over the weekend. I pulled it up online Sunday night, woke up early Monday morning, couldn't sleep, tossing and turning, and just kind of felt led to pin that letter. And honestly, as I sat down, it took all of 15 minutes, and it was out.
And what's happened since?
It has exploded. It's in places now I don't even know where it's posted. I got a text last night saying Ben Carson has even shared it now. So it's toothpaste out of the tube, and there's no putting it back. I've had a lot of folks text me saying they hope Colin sees it. They hope Colin reads it. They lament over the fact that he never will. And, I tell them it's not about him now, and it's not about me. It's bigger and more important than that. And, it's gonna do what I believe, the Lord wants it to do, go where the Lord wants it to go.
Yeah. Amen. And it has thus far. And here we are on national radio talking about it. Chris, what happened when you, as you say, had the misfortune of having to shoot and kill a 19-year-old African-American male? What happened?
I was in uniform patrol, bicycle patrol, and my partner and I were out in the community. It was just ravaged by drugs, marijuana primarily. And this was a Wednesday night, about 7:30 at night. We roll into that neighborhood on the bikes, and as I said, as we're rolling in, an older gentleman passes us and says, "Get him." And so we know the guys are out there dealing just by that. And we turn onto a street in which, that's where the drug open-air market tended to be, and we see a guy leaning into a car and another guy standing next to him. So we speed up and get pretty close. They don't see us because we're on bicycles and it's dark out. The lookout sees us first, and he takes off, and then the guy who was leaning in the car dealing, he takes off in a separate direction, and I follow the dealer. My partner follows the lookout or chases after, and I catch up to him pretty quick. I'm on a bike. He's running. And I'm yelling at him to give up. You got to be getting tired. You're not going to outrun this bike. Just trying to get in his head to get him to stop, realize he's not going to, pull up alongside of him, close enough to touch him. Plan A was to lunge off the bike onto him. He'd break my fall as we hit the ground. I'd handcuff him, and that's the end of the story. But Plan A's often don't come to pass like we think they may, and this was that case. I got on the pedals and I was preparing to lunge onto him. He spun. I didn't see anything in his hands. It was dark until there was a loud flash and a thud in my chest where he shot me in the chest. I locked the brakes up, went airborne over the handlebars, another flash, another bang. That round went through my left thigh. I hit the ground. I didn't moan, I didn't groan, I didn't roll around. He probably thought I was dead, so he turns to run. I slowly start reaching for my gun, rolling onto my side. He sees movement. He turns back, and he's coming back towards me as I draw my gun out. And we fire simultaneously, me for the first time, him for the third. And Doctor, by the grace of God, he missed, and by the wrath of God, I didn't. And he passed away. He was pronounced out there on the street, and I got to go home.
Yeah,
a couple days later.
You were married with kids. So let's process this first emotionally. What does that do to you?
At the time, I love the Lord, and I have a whole backstory that I won't even get into you, but it was one of kind of hopelessness and despair. I came to the Lord. He lifted me up out of the mire and gave me peace and hope and all those type things. So when all this happened, I knew, the Lord was in control. And so emotionally, physically, didn't lose a night's sleep, could see God's hand in it, even at the onset. Not glad I went through it. If I could turn back time and change it, I would have. But I've seen how God has used it. And I was able to go into several churches and, share testimony, brag on the Lord about this experience. And sir, the first 3 or 4 churches I went into were all African-American churches. And they opened their arms and hearts to me and just took me in as family. Not sure that would happen in the environment we're in now.
Yeah.
But back in '96, they did. And this family, the family of God thing, that stuff's real.
And Chris, the gentleman that said to you, get him, pointing out that there were drug dealers there, was he African American?
Oh, yes, he was. Yeah, he lived out there, and I didn't know him, but I knew kind of the environment these folks lived in, and it was tough.
Yeah,
it was hard. It was an area that kind of was on the forefront of one of the places we would patrol because of folks like this. Kind of a side note, I looked at the folder of this shooting a year later. I wanted to see the notes. I wanted to see the pictures. I just felt like I needed that for closure. So I pull out the folder of my shooting, get it from one of our homicide sergeants, and I'm reading through the notes. Come to find out, there was a young girl who came forward. There are a lot of witnesses. There's no shortage of witnesses when a policeman's involved in a shooting. Half of them weren't even there. Didn't know anything, but if you'll put a news camera in front of their face, a lot of folks will be willing to say what, quote, they saw,
right? Which
they didn't. Well, that existed that night, too. There were a lot of witnesses that saw me shoot first and do this, just crazy stuff. Found out a year later, I'm reading through this folder, and there was a young girl, an African-American girl, who I had befriended, and she had dropped out of high school. I got her to go back to high school and, would encourage her, would see her once, twice a week, and how are you doing? And when you graduate, I'm going to be there with a graduation gift, and tried to do what I could for her. Unbeknownst to me, she came forward voluntarily. She came forward to investigators, and said, no, this is what happened, and everything she said just corroborated everything I had told investigators. She was out there. I didn't know it at the time.
Amazing.
But she was out there. She had the courage to come forward, and because some of the troublemakers, if you will, were kind of her peers, or folks, much closer in age to her than to that old guy walking down the street that said, "Hey, get him." And so, but she came forward, and meant a lot to me. I didn't see her after the shooting, and to this day, I have no idea what happened to her.
Yeah.
But I was thankful she was there that night.
Yeah, and Chris, you note in your open letter to Colin Kaepernick on Facebook that during the time when you had to step away, obviously physical recovery and then investigation, whatever, the shooting, that you were living on about $3,000 a month while on leave, and at that point supporting a wife and 3 kids under 7 years old. And you also note that just about every cop you know has had to work a supplemental part-time job in order to support himself. There's some realities I think folks need to know. With the attack on police coming today, yeah, they're bad apples, as you acknowledge in the open letter. Let's talk about that. How many bad apples are there really? What about 7 colleagues of yours that were killed and 3 who committed suicide?
Are you suggesting that you don't think any progress has been made in the last 50 years?
Oh, no. There's been a lot of progress made, but we still have work to do. And over that period of time, a whole lot of people have died unnecessarily because of improper training for some of our police.
All right, that was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar speaking August 30th with Jake Tapper on CNN. I'm speaking with retired police officer Chris Amos, now a pastor. He's received multiple awards. Twice was selected as Officer of the Year. He was awarded his department's Medal of Valor, Purple Heart, and life-saving medals. Chris, how do you feel when you hear Kareem Abdul-Jabbar say that on national TV? Do you find yourself more in agreement with him, disagreement with him? Where do you stand?
You know, everybody has opinions. Everybody has their own personal experiences. You know, I can only speak to what I know. And I know our training is pretty intense as police officers. I know there's situations and circumstances that a police officer finds himself in that no amount of training can really prepare you for. And it's real easy to analyze and be that Monday morning quarterback after the fact. But when you find yourself in a situation and you've got seconds to react and respond, you know, that's a hard place to be in. You know, I was talking to a police officer last week who said, Chris, you know, I can't even do a traffic stop now without 2 or 3 other people stopping, not even involved in the stop, and pulling their phones out. And so there I am. I'm dealing with 1 or 2 or 3 people in this car. Now 2 and 3 other people have metal things in their hands pointed at me. I hope and pray their phones, but all it takes is for one time for it not to be a phone, it to be a gun.
Yeah.
And this is just during a simple traffic stop that police officers now are facing across the country. And that kind of constant stress, I mean, it's a hard thing. As I said, are there bad apples? Yes, there are. Are there bad cops? Yes, there are. And no one, in my opinion, no one should hate a bad cop more than a good cop.
Yep.
Because no one makes a good cop's job harder than a bad cop or a dirty cop. I've got 2 sons on the force. No one makes their job harder than when another post goes viral of some policeman needlessly beating somebody or multiple times shooting someone. That affects my boys. You know, law enforcement, it's a strange occupation. A teacher can molest a child in their classroom, and no one will think less of the teacher in the classroom next door or across the hall. But if a police officer does something in California, policemen in Virginia will bear the brunt of it. The way, you know, that just that broad stroke of what one does, they all do. And they lash out, and then if somebody speaks up and says, hey, wait a minute, the response is, well, we're not talking about everybody. We know they're good policemen. But nobody ever prefaces their comments with that. They always just unload on all of us.
Yeah, it is very true. And you think Colin Kaepernick did what he did, but people are not saying that reflects on all of the NFL or other players. And someone might say, but it happens more with police. Yeah, but again, you say in your open letter to Colin Kaepernick, there are almost 800,000 law enforcement officers. If there was if it was 10% that were bad apples and were committing regularly violent acts and engaging in acts of racial prejudice, whatever, then you'd have dozens and dozens and dozens of videos every single day all over America.
Sure.
So it does not diminish the wrong that's done by a bad apple, because that's a person in authority.
Absolutely not.
So, Chris, since you served in African American communities, obviously you're there to help. You're not there to hurt. You're there to help. Why is it that often that white America sees police more positively than black America does? And I'm giving a overly broad description, but why do you think that is?
I don't know. I think from the responses I've gotten, private messaging, a lot of African Americans, young, old, male, female, sworn civilian, have voiced their support that would never post it online. So I think there's some fear, some blowback. Some have mentioned as much. There, if somebody knew they were saying this kind of a thing. I think part of it is, in a sense, Andy Griffith has kind of done policing a disservice, and that police officers, Dr. Brown, our major responsibility is law enforcement, and no one likes that. Whether you're a Fortune 500 CEO or whether you're living on food stamps, nobody wants to be pulled over.
Exactly.
Nobody wants to be issued a ticket. Nobody. So by the very nature of what we do, it's not going to elicit a whole lot of fanfare because we're not popular. Policemen, if where policemen fall short, and maybe a lot, if not most policemen, is just plain what I would consider like our customer service. We can be kind of abrupt. We can be kind of abrupt. We can be kind of rude. We can, we can just come across as, just jerks. But that's a far cry from taking a gun out every chance we get and needlessly shooting someone, murdering someone, putting a notch in our gun belt. That is the exception. That is not the norm.
Yeah, and Chris, one time I was pulled over for going through a red light. My New York habit of speeding up at a yellow light, and I was in Pensacola, Florida, where they kind of had the opposite habit there. And I was writing a book, and I was just meditating on constructive rebuke and different things like that, and God's correction. So the officer, got my info, but when he came back over to talk with me, I thanked him for doing his job and told him what a blessing it was. He said, "Oh man, I already wrote it up. It's too late." I said, "No, really, I just want to thank you." I knew he didn't hear that much, but on behalf of many of us who have been pulled over, many of us whose lives have been saved, many of us who have been protected, yes, we all stand against the bad apples and want to see injustice exposed, but we thank the overwhelming number of you that have served. Now your son's serving here at the risk of your own life. So thank you, sir, and may your letter speak to many and hopefully to Colin Kaepernick as well.
Amen. Thank you, Dr. Brown, for having me.